So welcome. We're having a lot of fun with doing these every Tuesday. And it's going to be just me tonight. So Marianne is here, but she's going to be off camera helping with the comments and stuff. We're only going to make one thing tonight. That's why. This one is a little bit more involved and it's got a couple parts, but some people asked for enchiladas last week, so we're doing our enchiladas with cheese sauce. Those are the most popular enchiladas that we make, and they're also pretty easy and don't have as many ingredients as some of the other enchiladas. This is a great family meal. Most people really like it. It's very popular on our menu. Kids like it. They're not overly spicy, although you can adjust the spice level some. Before we get into the recipe, I'll just do really quick introductions. I'm Annette, my sister Marianne, and my business partner is here, but not on camera. We are the co-owners of Nature's Plate. And for those of you who don't know, Nature's Plate is whole food, plant-based meals to go, meaning that we have 3 stores, 2 in Dallas, 1 in Plano. Right now, we're only doing curbside pickup. And we also do weekly meal plan subscriptions and pre-orders, which are available for delivery in Dallas and most of the surrounding area all the way up to Frisco. And I just want to mention that our deliveries are $5 right now throughout that entire area for weekly plans. That's all I'll say about that, because we're going to get into cooking enchiladas, but it's a great deal, and we're doing it as long as the COVID-19 situation keeps us from being completely open. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is make the filling for the enchiladas. If y'all have any questions as we go along, please post them and we will stop and answer them as soon as possible. We will also post the recipe afterwards. So if you just want to pay attention to the technique, you'll have the quantities and everything, but you're welcome to take notes. I will tell you the quantities during the demo as well. So we're going to start with the filling, and the filling you can make. This has like a taco meat consistency for the enchilada filling. We do a few different taco meats. You can make plant-based taco meat from everything from cauliflower to walnuts to lentils to quinoa to mushrooms and combinations of those things. This one is a combination of mushrooms, lentils, and quinoa as the base with some onion and a lot of spices. This is a no added oil recipe, so the spices become really important because we're going to try to keep the salt level down, and we already don't have oil. And those are, other than mouthfeel for the oil, those are really the roles that the oil and salt generally play in traditional cooking. They up the flavor, they help you taste everything else. So what we need is more spice when we're cooking without those things. Anyway, this is going to be a water saute or a no oil saute, and we will talk about that in a little more detail. It does not need to be in any kind of special pot like ceramic or non-stick. Ideally, it would be probably in a little bit more of a skillet, but I don't really have a good one. We use, a lot of bigger pots, so I'm going to use this and it's going to work just fine. We're going to start with a cup of diced onion and 4 cups of mushrooms that have been washed or had the dirt brushed off of them, and we're going to run them through the food processor to mince them. You can hand mince them, but if you don't want to put them through the food processor. First of all, here's my cup of diced onion. Somebody chopped some of these diced onions pretty large. It wasn't me, so I'm breaking them up a little bit, but I shouldn't complain that I didn't chop my own onion. Okay. So we've got a cup of diced onion, and I'm going to run these mushrooms through the food processor to mince them. They're whole white mushrooms. You can also use brown or cremini mushrooms. If the stems don't look particularly good, you can cut those off, but otherwise you're using the whole mushroom. When you can chop them by hand. If you have anybody in your household who is averse to mushrooms or thinks they're averse to mushrooms, because honestly, what I've seen is that a lot of people think they don't like mushrooms, but once they're cut up small enough and in something, they just think it tastes good. I think it's the idea of eating fungus that bothers people, but they add so much flavor. So anyway, we're going to do these in the food processor, which is great if you've got mushroom averse people because it chops them up really small. You don't want to put a lot of mushrooms in here at a time. We're only going to put half of these and then the other half, because it lets you process them more evenly. And you also don't want to run this very long because your mushrooms will turn to this black mush that would make anybody mushroom reverse. Well, except me, because I love mushrooms. But they don't process them very long. This is going to be a little bit loud. Not as loud as the blender in a little while, but a little loud. It's actually not too bad. You may need to scrape down the sides if you get like a mushroom stuck on the side of the food processor. And that's all it takes, is just a little bit of processing, and then they are processed small and evenly. And then we are going to put these in the pot with our onion. Probably could have done a little bit more in there, but I didn't want to create black mush for y'all.
Can you think of any alternatives that would work if you're not using mushrooms?
If you really, really don't want to use mushrooms, you can just leave them out and add, I would say, more onion and a little bit more lentils. There really isn't a good substitute for mushrooms because they really add flavor. So you can add more of the base to make up for the volume, and then you'll probably want some more of your spices and a little bit more nutritional use, because that's where most of the flavor is coming from. You could use a little bit of like Worcestershire sauce or something like that, or tamari, because those have a little bit of the umami effect, the flavor that mushrooms add also. It's a flavor that best mimics meat for people who miss the flavor of meat and the depth that it adds to the food. So that's the reason for using it. It's the good part of meat flavor, not the not good part. Okay, that's it for our second and last batch of mushrooms. We're going to add these to the pot also, and then we're going to start sauteing this. Y'all may remember, if you have seen me do this before or somebody else, that these mushrooms are going to release a lot of water really quickly, especially in this case because they're processed. So we may or may not need any water in this pot to do our water saute. It may just be a dry saute. Well, it's not really dry because the mushrooms will release a lot of water. But we will start with just like less than a tablespoon of water just to be sure. But for the most part, these are just going to cook with the mushrooms are going to start releasing water, and I will show y'all what that looks like. So we've got heat on those. We may need to adjust the camera angle a little bit because I'm going to move over here. I think we'll be okay. Mostly what y'all want to see is a pot of food and not me anyway. I am going to put these spices on one level, and I will show y'all what these look like as they cook also. But basically we're going to saute the onions and the mushrooms until the mushrooms release all of their liquid, or a lot of the, and then the pan will dry out after that. And that's how you get the best flavor out of your mushrooms. If you are not using mushrooms, you could just saute onions, and you could use a little garlic too. We're using garlic powder. You could do either one. We're going to add garlic powder with our spices, but especially if you're not using mushrooms, I would take the time to mince fresh garlic and put it in there, because that would help the flavor also. I said I was going to put water in here and I didn't do it. I don't really think it needs it. So the thing about sauteing without oil is stirring it constantly, which I realize I'm not doing right now, but I stir it a lot. It also helps to use a spatula instead of a spoon so that you can scrape the surface of the bottom of the pot as it's going, so that things are less likely to stick. Because then once you get some liquid from the mushrooms, which I'm already getting, or liquid that you added, it keeps it from sticking to the pot. So once this sautés down, and we want some pretty good heat on that too. Once it sautés down, we are going to add 1 3/4 cups of cooked lentils, green or brown lentils, not red lentils. We pre-cooked these, and all you have to do to cook lentils from dry is rinse them sort them in case there's like any small stones or anything in there, but rinse them and then put them in water, about 2 cups of water or 3 cups of water for every cup of lentils, and that's not critical. Just put a lot of water in the pot, bring it to a boil, cook it for 20 minutes, check it, and it'll be 20 to 25 minutes after it started boiling. And then just check them and make sure they're soft. You can also use canned lentils, and this is about what will come in 1 can. It'll be just over 1.5 cups, which is close enough. You can just drain those and rinse them. They come in a can just like black beans or chickpeas do. So you can use those too. And then we also have, I think it is, let's see, on the quinoa, we have some cooked quinoa, 1.5 cups of cooked quinoa, which is equal to 1/2 cup uncooked. If you want to cook quinoa in your Instant Pot or on the stove top, I like to do like with rice, cook this ahead of time and keep it in the freezer. This was frozen and we defrosted it. If you are cooking it on your stove top, if anybody wants a technique for that, ask in the questions and I'll talk about it at the end. But this is already cooked, and if you have an Instant Pot, then you're probably cooking your quinoa that way and you'll be fine. This is going to make 12 enchiladas, which is probably 6 servings if you're eating anything else with it, like a salad or anything like that. If you have people who are bigger eaters in your family, it would be 4 servings. That would be like our large size for those who have purchased it in the store. So it's either 4 large servings or 6 regular. So this, I'm going to pull it off and show y'all real quick, is very almost soupy right now. Well, maybe not quite soupy, but there's a lot of liquid in here that came off of the mushrooms. And we're going to cook it until that liquid evaporates and it looks like it's going to start sticking. And the mushrooms now are really getting cooked down also because they have a lot of liquid in them and it's releasing that liquid. Okay, so once that starts to stick, we will add these two. That's awesome. So we are going to mix together some spices that we'll add after, right before we add our quinoa and lentils. I'm going to turn this heat down just a little bit because I won't be stirring it quite as often. Let me put some of this in here. I'm going to want, so on the spices, I'll read these out, but we will post it. We're going to have 1.5 teaspoons of either salt or herbamare, and we'll come back and talk about what herbamare is in a minute. And then I'm going to do 1.5 teaspoons of cumin. And I'm going to do 1.5 teaspoons of paprika. And 1/2 teaspoon of chili powder. 1/2 teaspoon of coriander. And I'm going to pause and stir real quick. Okay, so we did the 1/2 teaspoon of coriander, 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, and a teaspoon of oregano. And no, I do not recommend estimating all of your spices based on the same measuring tool, regardless of the quantity. I've just measured a lot of spices, but if you're comfortable with that, go right ahead. All right, this is 2 teaspoons of nutritional yeast. If anybody has questions about what nutritional yeast is, we'll answer those in a while too. But so that's.
Talk about the different. There's questions about is cumin different from coriander? So just real quick.
Yes, they're 2 different plants. They're 2 different spices. Coriander is actually the seed of the same plant that you get cilantro from, but cumin and coriander are 2 different plants. And so coriander is a seed ground up. Cumin is also a seed ground up, but from 2 different plants. Okay, I think we have cooked off our liquid successfully. So I'm going to add the spices next. And the reason for that is you always want to add your spices after your savory components like onions, garlic, mushrooms, ginger, whatever it is you're using, because you want these to steam for just a minute before you add the other components. That's how you get the best flavor. This is a really important part of the dish. A lot of the flavor is coming from here. So we've got that in there, and I'm going to stir it up. And then you just want like that to be in the pot for like 30 to 60 seconds before you add everything else. So now I'm going to put the quinoa and the lentils in there with up to a cup of water. I'm going to add about a half a cup first. The water is just going to help everything mix together. I don't want it to be watery, so I'm going to let that liquid burn off too. Can you get me a potato masher? Like, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to put in about a half a cup of water and use that to stir it all up and let the spices coat everything evenly. Thank you. And then as soon as it is like heated all the way through and there's no liquid in it, I'm going to pull it off of the heat. And then I will show y'all what we have in the last step. I'm going to let that cook for just a minute. I'm actually going to go ahead and mix up spices for the cheese sauce real quick while we're letting that cook for just a minute. And we'll talk about the cheese sauce here in just a second too, but the cheese sauce that goes on top of these will have half a teaspoon of salt or herb amare, half a teaspoon of garlic powder.
You want to talk about herb amare too?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we can do that. Marianne just reminded me to talk about herb amare, and we will do that too. 3/4 of a teaspoon of cumin. This has a lot of the same spices that the filling did. 3/4 of a teaspoon of chili powder and half a teaspoon of onion powder. Okay, my liquid should be burnt off back here. Let's take a look at this. Yes, this. Okay, so what we have here, so this is the quinoa, the lentils with the onions and mushrooms and those spices. So you can see that it kind of looks like taco meat, at least the color and the consistency. And that's what we want. We're going to mash it up a little bit so that it'll hold together inside of the enchiladas a little better. So I've got a potato masher here. You can use any kind of potato masher or even the back of a spoon, because we're not going to mash it a lot, just a little bit to get it to stick together. And then I actually want this to dry out just a little bit more because I'm getting some liquid as I mash it. So I'm going to leave it on some very low heat back here for a few minutes while I make the cheese sauce. Stir this up one more time. Okay. All right. So herb amare is an ingredient that you can use instead of salt. It's actually a mix of herbs and salt, and herb amare is the commercial brand. It's a commercially available brand, like you can get it through Amazon or at Natural Grocers or Sprouts or Whole Foods. We actually make our own blend. It's herb salt. It's actually not herb amare. But you can just Google herb salt, and there are a lot of recipes out there, and some of them will say even that they're similar to herb amare. The idea is that you replace it 1-for-1 with salt, so you're getting half the sodium, but the mix of herbs, and it has a little kelp in it, is really good for making it taste like it has the full amount of salt in it. So we use that a lot in all kinds of recipes, but you can also just use table salt if you're not concerned about sodium intake. But probably most of us should be trying to limit it somewhat. Okay, now we are going to move on to making cheese sauce. So this sauce is a mix of cashews and potatoes as the base. It's similar to our nacho cheese sauce, which we have made in another demo. The reason that we use cooked potato as part of this is because it's a little bit less calorie and fat in your end result. There are a lot of different varieties of cheese sauces, and you could certainly use something more like the nacho cheese on here. It would be even richer. There are also lots of recipes online, and you could convert this one to be all potatoes and no cashews. But we really prefer the mix of the two because you get the richness of the fat from the cashews, but it's not as calorie dense. And there's definitely no oil in it. It's just the fat from the cashews. Okay, let me see if this is ready to pull off of here. We'll let that sit for a few more minutes. Okay, now on the cheese sauce. These cashews are just raw cashew halves. You can pre-soak these if you want to. It makes it easier to blend. If you do not have a high-speed blender, and high-speed blender generally means Vitamix or Blendtec, there's really not anything else that has a motor quite as powerful. If you're using another blender, you probably want to pre-soak your cashews for at least 4 hours, but overnight is great. That just means you put them in a container, something like this. This is half a cup of cashews. You cover them with water, leave them overnight, and then the next morning drain the water off, or start them in the morning if you're going to cook dinner. We did not soak these, so we'll have to blend this for a few minutes. So the cashews are going in there. 1 1/4 cups of water. 3/4 cups of nutritional yeast. This is what gives it the cheesy flavor. We put a little bit in the filling, which just ups the flavor, but this really makes the cheese sauce taste like cheese sauce. We are putting we're putting some red bell pepper, and this is our cooked potato. It's in here with the red bell pepper. The pepper is just chopped. It's not diced real small or anything. Doesn't need to be. And the potato is just peeled and boiled. The potato just needs to be cooked until it's soft. You could also microwave it. The red bell pepper helps with the flavor of this, but also the color. So it's a really natural way to make it orange. People use carrots for that too, but orange instead of just yellow. But obviously we don't want to put coloring in there. So we're going to dump, these are just raw, fairly large pieces of red bell pepper into the blender, and they're just going to get blended up. Okay, now we're going to put 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. This is fresh squeezed lemon juice from actual lemons. That's what you want to use anytime that you're using citrus. The lemon juice helps give it a sharpness that you would normally find in cheese. And now we're going to add in all of our spices that I mixed together a few minutes ago. And one last thing are pickled jalapenos, and pickled just means they're like this, that come in a jar. They're not raw. For the jalapenos, these are actually mild. So this recipe calls for 2 to 6 pickled jalapenos because that's a range for spiciness. I'm going to go high on the 6 side because these are mild jalapenos. Otherwise, I would just do 2 or 3. I'm going to back up and give you the quantities on a couple other things. It is on the diced red bell pepper, it's about 1/3 of a cup, 1/3 to 1/2 of a cup. And it's 1 small gold potato. I don't really have another good way to do that. We do it by weight in our kitchen, but it's not really critical how much potato gets in there, just 1 small gold potato. You peel it and boil it in water until it's soft, or microwave it. Okay, I'm going to pull this off of here because otherwise it's going to start to stick, and it can just sit here. And I'm going to go ahead and put my probably 6 slices of jalapeno in my sauce. But yeah, if you have hot jalapenos, then you would not. Well, some people might want that many even with hot jalapenos. Okay, now we're going to blend up the sauce. This is going to be loud, so I am going to get rid of the microphone for just a minute and until I get this blended up. So I'll be right back. So our cheese sauce is done. I scraped the sides down once just to make sure that all the cashews got blended up really well and checked it to make sure it's not grainy. So I'm going to set that right here. So we're going to use that to cover up the enchiladas in a few minutes. So we had a question about potatoes, the difference between russets and gold potatoes. Is that the question?
Yeah.
So gold potatoes have a little bit more of a buttery flavor in and of themselves. And russet potatoes are a little bit starchier. That is not a big deal in this recipe, and you can use russet potatoes if that's what you have at home. The gold potatoes make a little bit smoother feeling, like mouthfeel for the dressing, but not a huge deal. You can definitely use russet potatoes. Just make sure you peel them. The peels on russet potatoes are wonderful. I love to eat them on all kinds of things, but they're not great in a sauce. Okay, now we're going to roll up the enchiladas and make those. So this pan is the equivalent, it's shaped a little bit differently, but of a 13 by 9 pan that you would have at home. And that's what you would use for this quantity of 12 enchiladas. So we've taken 12 corn tortillas. They're just plain organic corn tortillas. They're Mi Rancho brand. We can show you that here in a little bit, but most people prefer organic corn so that it's non-GMO, and also because the ingredient list tends to be cleaner. It's just usually the cornmeal, salt, and lime, and this does have a little bit of guar gum in it as a stabilizer, but this is what those tortillas look like. And there is a cleaner brand of tortillas that you can get. They're Food for Life brand, sprouted corn, and honestly I like them better. They taste better. We do not use them because they break apart really easily. And when you're making hundreds of enchiladas, nobody has the patience for that. Plus, we don't want to serve broken enchiladas. But if you're doing it for your family, I would get those. And you can even, if they break apart, it doesn't really matter. They're still going to taste good. Casserole, yes. So you can question about where you get Mi Rancho tortillas. You can definitely get them at natural grocers, and I think Whole Foods has them sometime. I'm not sure about Sprouts. I think even Kroger might have them. I just realized that even though we managed to go landscape successfully, I did not flip. No, I guess we did flip the screen so that my Eat More Plants is not backwards. But we'll get it all right next time. Yeah. Okay.
Tiffany says you can get them at Market Street.
Oh, at Market Street also, Tiffany said, for the Mi Rancho tortillas. The Food for Life ones, I think, are pretty much available at those same places. Okay, so we're going to roll these up. We're going to take about 1/3 cup of filling for each one, and It doesn't, you can make a casserole out of these if you don't want to mess with rolling them, but basically we're gonna roll them and place them in this pan side by side. You want them rolled, if you are trying to roll them and make relatively neat enchiladas, you want them to be tightly rolled and close together. They won't fit in this size pan if they're not close together anyway, but the biggest thing is that way they don't have gaps between the filling and the tortilla. If they do have a lot of gaps between the filling and the tortilla, the tortilla will dry out and not be very appetizing when you're done. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but if you don't want to go through this process of rolling these, I would just layer the tortillas and the filling in the pot, in this pan, and cover it with the cheese sauce and cook it. I don't think your family is going to care. It does make it easier if you want to portion them out like for meal prep. If you want to portion them out into separate containers and eat them throughout the week, it does make it easier to have separate enchiladas. But it's, again, not a big deal. You could scoop it out. I'm not going quite as fast because I'm talking at the same time, but sometimes we actually have enchilada rolling contests in our kitchen to see who can roll them the fastest. And I'm pretty fast at it. Alexis is even faster. She's here, that's why I said that.
And how many enchiladas do we roll on a typical Saturday?
Marianne asked how many enchiladas we roll on a typical Saturday, and it depends, but at least a couple hundred, sometimes 400. Sometimes, how many have y'all done? Do you know what your record is? She's calculating to. Almost 600. That's a lot of enchiladas, definitely.
We haven't posted the nacho cheese recipe, have we?
I don't know. Is somebody asking about it?
Yeah, I know that we shared it with the Dallas Morning News.
Yes.
But they haven't printed it yet.
Oh, right.
I can put
Well, or we may at some point. Okay. Second to last enchilada. I'm going to scrape the very last of the filling out from the pot. Roll this last one up. And then we're going to pour our cheese sauce over the top. And basically you just want, with the cheese sauce on the enchiladas, you want to cover them completely. So we're going to spread it out a little bit after we do this. But you want to cover them completely so that, again, the tortillas don't dry out in the oven. And then we're going to cook this for about 10 minutes in a 350 oven. So we will use this. So now I'm just going to spread it to the edges of all of these, and you want it even so everybody gets the same amount of cheese sauce. And that's what it looks like. And then we're going to put it in the oven and cook it for 10 minutes. That just kind of firms up the cheese sauce where it stays in place on each enchilada and warms everything up really well. So it'll be perfect to eat right out of the oven. This recipe is great for a family dinner. If you put a green salad with it, it makes a really complete meal, and maybe some fruit also to go with it. But you can also just eat it on its own or with some other vegetables. It's very nutritious in spite of the fact that it's relatively indulgent, or seems like it is for a whole food plant-based meal. But the two enchiladas, the one serving, have 380 calories and 19 grams of protein. The lentils and the quinoa really, along with the cashews, really up the protein content. 12 grams of fiber. Fiber is a huge deal, and we talk about it a lot in our cooking demos. I know y'all didn't necessarily come here to hear about fiber, but I'm going to talk about fiber. According to the FDA or the USDA nutritional guidelines, women are supposed to have 25 grams a day and men 30 grams. The average American gets less than half of that, which is what's in these enchiladas, but we need a lot more than that. This is, for a whole food plant-based meal, this isn't even particularly fiber rich. If you add a vegetable to it, you're going to up that, and if you add fruit, up it even more. It's pretty easy. eating whole food plant-based to get 20 plus grams of fiber per meal. And that's more like how much fiber we need to really be healthy. And it's not just about your digestive system. Not that your digestive system isn't important, and and it is, but your gut health, which impacts your overall health and every aspect of your life. There are studies showing that it impacts your mental health, not just your physical health. It's all connected, and the bacteria in your gut, having a healthy variety, I know this is really what y'all came to hear about, but the variety of bacteria in your gut is what determines how healthy your gut is and how good your microbiome is, if you've heard that term. And the variety of fiber and the amount of fiber that you have available is that's what the bacteria eat. So that's what makes you have a variety of bacteria, is having the fiber first. And eating a wide variety of plant foods makes you have a wide variety of healthy bacteria. Okay, that's probably enough about fiber. This also has 25%, just 2 enchiladas, 25% of the daily value of calcium and 25% of the daily value of iron. Those are 2 things that people tend to question, can you really get these things from vegan food? Well, you absolutely can. And 2 enchiladas is not a large meal. You're probably going to eat something else with it. It's very easy to get your calcium and iron from a plant-based meal. Okay, other than cooking these in the oven at 350 for 10 minutes, we're done. So we're not gonna show that part today. I might take these home and cook them and eat them for dinner. But what other questions do we have?
Can you talk about the quinoa and also just make sure people know that's uncovered?
Yes, you cook this uncovered, just like this. That helps, and that's why it's only 10 minutes. You don't want it to dry out too much. So yes, the process for cooking quinoa, if you are not doing it in an Instant Pot or some other pressure cooker that you have at home, the best way that I know to do it, and this is how we actually do it in our kitchen, is to take your quinoa, wash it really well. This is the most important step, and it actually applies even if you're using an Instant Pot. And we've shown this in some past demos, and we can show it again, but you want to cover the quinoa with water, rub it between your fingers while it's in the water until it'll have this soapy coating that comes off of it and makes the water look soapy, or at least cloudy, and then rinse it, do that again, and rinse it. And then the water should be clear coming off of it. At that point, you want to put it in a pot with 1.5 times, like 1 part quinoa to 1.5 parts water. So if it's 1 cup of quinoa, it's 1.5 cups of water. If you look up how to cook quinoa on the internet, pretty much anywhere, they will tell you to use 1 part quinoa to 2 parts water. Don't do that. It makes very mushy quinoa. If you want fluffy quinoa, wash it really well and use 1 part quinoa, 1.5 parts water. And then what you want to do is bring that to a boil, the water in the quinoa, a rolling boil, not the boil where the bubbles are just kind of popping off the bottom of the pan, but a good boil. Cover it with a lid that fits the pot well, turn the heat down to low, and let it cook for 20 minutes without taking the pot off. Now you may, if you haven't done this before, have to open the pot up just to look at it and make sure it's still simmering. You want a really low boil for that 20 minutes. But once you know what setting to use on your stove, you can just leave the pot on. At 20 minutes, you want to remove the pot from the burner, but leave it covered for 10 more minutes. The steaming process continues and makes it fluffy. If you're gonna and that's it at that point, the 10 minutes. If you're gonna put your quinoa, if you're gonna freeze your quinoa for later use and put it in something like this, the fluffiness isn't that big a deal. And honestly, it's not really gonna matter. But if you're making quinoa salad, it matters a lot, and it makes a lot better end result. Anything else? Okay. All right. We are probably going to wrap up unless y'all have any other questions. The recipe will be out there probably tomorrow morning, because tonight I'm going to be busy eating enchiladas. And no, there's some other stuff I need to do. But I will put the recipe out there tomorrow morning. And we really appreciate y'all joining us. This is a lot of fun for us. We love sharing this information. And obviously right now there's not really another good way for us to do that. We'll resume cooking classes when we can invite people back into our kitchen. And we have some exciting news actually about classes in general that we're going to be putting out there soon. Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead.
On the spot, so you may or may not want to hit. So what's the best part of bringing Nature's Plate to the community?
The best part of bringing Nature's Plate to the community, it's when people who are hesitant about plant-based food come in and try something and really enjoy it and believe that they can eat more plant-based food. And that also goes for specific ingredients. I've had several people who come to cooking classes. Marianne and I've talked to several people in the stores. We all have, who, for example, did not like mushrooms, but eat something with mushrooms in it and like it. And anytime that we can get people to eat more plants, that is the most satisfying part of it. And really, I know I'm giving a multi-part answer, but that's what the whole thing is about, the classes as well as all the work that goes into cooking